Hey all, it's Matt, your average gamer, and for this video, we're going to be going over the Spear of the Impaler. This is an amazing weapon that you can get from the remembrance of Messmer. We ended up with a phenomenal build for it. We're going to showcase it, talk about it, and of course go over stats, build, everything you need to know at rune level 150. Out of all the weapons in the game, this is by far one of my favorites so far, no question about it. Rellana's twin blades were awesome, but this weapon, not only does it do a lot of damage, it looks great too on the Ash of War. If you build around it the right way, it could turn into something really powerful, and it's very convenient for most situations. When I tell you when I started putting several hours into Messmer's Impaler to try to find a build around for it, to basically build around for it and figure out how it scales and everything, I could not put this weapon down. I love everything about it, from being able to throw the spear on the charge attacks to the amazing Ash of War. Now, even the regular light attacks do a great amount of damage. Now, the fire part of this weapon is going to scale with your Faith stat, and then, of course, the physical part is going to scale with Dexterity. I've got it to the point where it has over 700 AR, it does massive damage on the Ash of War, and your light and charge attacks are good too. Basically, I was able to balance this weapon out. Now, the Ash of War is quite long, and it doesn't have infinite poise. You could absolutely get knocked out of it. The slam down, the final action of the Ash of War, does the most damage by far, and if you're able to get that off, it does several thousand damage every time. And the Ash of War obviously does a lot of fire damage, but it's better to split your stats here, and that's what we ended up doing because it does a lot of physical damage too, which very much split, much like Rellana's twin blades, which is quality all the way around. But with this weapon, you really only have to invest in 2 stats, and that is going to be Faith and Dexterity to get good damage. Of course, you gain this weapon from Messmer's Remembrance, and that is around the mid-game. I'm not going to show too many spoilers in this video, but later on we do take on a side boss Remembrance, a kind of late-game side boss Remembrance, so there is spoilers there. I'll mention that, though, before the clip comes up. We're going to talk about this throughout the video, but the charge attacks, which is a thrown spear that will leave fire on the ground, and it does anywhere between 500 and 800 damage. It has a lot of range, but it is very stamina costly. In the end, though, it just adds on to an already amazing weapon. Faith and Dexterity was kind of just okay. I feel like Strength and Faith was a better way to go for the most part, but with Messmer's Impaler, it makes Dexterity and Faith so much better. It's absolutely amazing. It's an excellent weapon. Now, one complaint I've heard about the DLC so far is that the DLC weapons aren't as good as the base game, and I do believe that is true to some extent. I think some of them are going to get buffed, though, in patches that are going to come up. I believe they're still going to patch some things. However, Spear of the Impaler is an exception, and as good as many of the weapons in the base game, it really is awesome. I mean, from the absolutely amazing aesthetics to the fantastic amount of damage you could do, and the fact that you could see here an NPC Invader absolutely got shredded by this. By the way, that was one of the later game ones, and this is going to be the spoiler boss that comes up later in the video. It really is one of those weapons that you're not going to be able to put down. This is also excellent for mob control. If there's a whole bunch of mobs around you, and as long as you don't get knocked out of the animation, you can absolutely shred them. Look at this animation. You got your first strike, then you have 3 successive hits, which, by the way, will build up on successive attacks as long as you land them all, and then, of course, that final slam, which does a ton of damage. This is definitely an Ash of War 2 that you want to get through the whole animation if you can. Now, it's not going to have infinite poise. You absolutely can be knocked out of this. This isn't Lion's Claw. You're not going to be up in the air and unable to be knocked down. You can be knocked down, so you want to try to time it so that you don't get hit too much during the Ash of War. Now, look at the top left of my screen. Look at the amount of stamina that the thrown spear costs. I love the ability to throw the spear on the charge attacks, but man, that's a lot of stamina. You pretty much have to be on max level to even use it just 3 times. It costs a lot of stamina to use the throwing spear. And that's just one downside and an otherwise amazing weapon. Now, this weapon itself, I'm giving it an S. I'm just going to rate it right now before the end of this video. This weapon's an absolute S because it makes Dexterity and Faith better, which we're always trying to run because it's a cool combination. This weapon does it right and gives you a lot of damage in the process. I'd put this up there with the best of the DLC weapons. A lot of people were commenting on my channel and asking me to do a build for Messmer's Impaler or Spear of the Impaler, and I was kind of taking my time grabbing all the weapons along the way. Once I grabbed this weapon, I realized very fast how good this weapon truly is. Eventually, when I get all the DLC weapons, I will do a tier list, no question about it, and when I do, I have no doubt in my mind that this is going to be at the top of the tier list among the best weapons in DLC, and I haven't even tried anything yet. I could just tell it does a lot of damage, and it really is a very good weapon. This, by the way, also shreds rune bears who are weak to fire if you didn't know that, and it also shreds tree avatars too. So if you're fighting any of the tree avatars in the game or the rune bears, which could be really challenging, Messmer's Impaler, Spear of the Impaler, is an excellent choice. Yeah, especially for bigger targets because you're going to hit most of the Ash of War on them, and if they're slower, you're going to be able to pull off the entire animation of the Ash of War. I imagine some of the faster bosses could be a little bit more difficult, but for bigger bosses especially, this really shines. Alright, just want to mention real quick, spoilers do follow for a late game side boss, Remembrance. This is a side boss, but technically speaking, I think it can be an important one, so there is some spoilers here, and the build, of course, is time-stamped. Alright, now for a tough boss fight. We're going to use Mimic for this one. I do use summons for a lot of first runs. When I go through the game a second time, I'll probably do the entire thing solo. That's kind of how I ran the first game. And honestly, I'm probably going to beat the DLC at least 10 times or more because it's a phenomenal DLC so far. It has been an amazing experience, and honestly, I love it. Speaking of which, I beat the main part of the DLC last night. It was truly so good. I mean, honestly, I know it's challenging. I know a lot of people are having difficulty with it. Make sure you pick up the Scatter Tree fragments. I have another video that mentions that. You need to power up along the way because the end game is very challenging. Not to scare you, but if you thought the early game was challenging and the mid game was even more difficult, if you're not at the late game yet, the late game is extremely challenging. No spoilers on the final boss here, but relatively, compared to the rest of the bosses in the game, is right up there with Elden Beast, Radabeast the first time, Melania, etc. Extremely difficult to take down. Speaking of which, even this Mother of Fingers boss is actually a little bit difficult. I ended up having to do this 6 or 8 times in total, even with Mimic trying to learn the moveset or get a better idea of the moveset, and I found it a bit frustrating. She's a little bit on the slower side in terms of attacks, but she has a lot of combos, even slow ones, that can go on for a long time. And that can be frustrating, no question about it. Some of these bosses have a lot of delayed attacks too. She is no exception to that. She has delayed attacks too. Some of her slams feel a little bit delayed. Overall, though, I was able to get in one entire use of the Ash of War and a lot of throwing spears. I like the throwing spear a ton. I just wish eventually, I don't know if the right word is nerf or buff. I feel like buff's the wrong word because we want lower stamina cost for this, but I hope they eventually change it so it costs a little bit less stamina on the charge attacks because right now it takes up a ton of stamina. And for around 600 to 800 damage in total for most of the enemies in the game, keep in mind a lot of the finger type enemies take additional fire damage. I feel like that's too much stamina per the damage that you're getting. I feel like it should be cheaper in terms of stamina cost when using the throwing spear. So yeah, going back through this, using the entire animation of the Ash of War when you can is probably better in terms of utilization for most things, but if you're going to use a summon, hanging back and throwing these spears does enough damage too. Just keep an eye on the stamina bar so you don't end up losing too much and you're able to roll and dodge attacks after using it. And that was a really close one at the end, and of course we were able to finish off Mother of Fingers there using the throwing spear, and that was a really challenging side boss, by the way. You could face this boss later on in the DLC. That's one of the 10 Remembrance bosses in the DLC. Alright, in a second here, we're going to go over the buffing order, stats build, everything you need to know for this amazing weapon. And for the buffing order, you want to start with the longest duration stuff first. So first things first, drink your tear. After drinking your tear, you're going to use Golden Vow, which you can find past the tree avatar in Mount Gelmir. Flame Grant Me Strength is next, which is the shortest. You can get that at Fort Jail, which is in Caelid, the first fort in Caelid. It's behind the fort you could see from Rotview Balcony. Then we have the throwing charge attacks, we have our light attacks, and then of course we have this amazing Ash of War which has a ton of hits, a lot of fire and physical damage, and a slam down that does thousands of damage. Alright, now for the build and stats. For the build, we have the Spear of the Impaler plus 10. We have any seal we're using for buffs, does not matter. You could check out our armor set there. You could hit 51 poise with the Stamina, Fire Scorpion Charm, Ritual Swords Talisman, Millicent's Prosthesis, Shard of Alexander, and then we have the Flame tier and Faith tier. For the record, I did try this with 51 poise. I didn't try it with over 100. You could still get knocked out of it. It's a little bit better, but it doesn't have infinite hype armor or anything like Lion's Claw. We have 60 vigor, 20 mind, 26 endurance, 15 strength, 50 dexterity, 55 faith with the Faith tier. And that, by the way, with Millicent's Prosthesis is going to make your levels add up to 165, so keep that in mind. 165 will be your total. I use the Samurai starting class. We already talked about buffs before, Golden Vow and Flame Grant Me Strength. Now, where do you get everything as far as the talismans and tiers? The Shard of Alexander and Millicent's Prosthesis, those quest lines are in the description below. I'm going to show you first right here at Lux Ruins. This is where you can grab the Ritual Swords Talisman. 10% more damage at full HP. Next up here, we're going to move up to Mount Gelmer, where you're going to have to go to Fort Lade or Fort Lad or however you say that. And that's right there on the map in Mount Gelmer. You can grab the Fire Scorpion Charm to add on to your fire damage. And then next up at this minor Erdtree in Caelid, you can grab the Flame Tier. That's going to increase your fire damage and is excellent for Messmer's Impaler, Spear of the Impaler. Lastly, this is where you get the Faith Tier in the Weeping Peninsula. And it's going to be right under the bridge there. There's going to be some plants down there. You can grab the Faith Tier. I recommend having this tier. It's really convenient, especially for buffs. Thanks for watching this one. Thanks for tuning into a Spear of the Impaler build. I hope this helps you build this spear into something incredible. It is an amazing weapon, super powerful, definitely borderline overpowered for the weapon so far we're getting in the DLC, and one worth trying out for sure. If you're not subbed yet, now's the time to sub. No question about it. You should be subbed to this channel if you're playing Elden Ring. There's going to be a ton of awesome content coming up for you. Be sure to join the Discord. That's in the pinned comment below, and I hope everybody has a fantastic day.